Our next presenter is Doug Given. So let me give you a brief on Doug.
Please don't read the whole thing.
I did chop it down a bit. So Doug is the Earthquake Early Warning Coordinator for USGS, which means that he's responsible for coordinating the efforts of the USGS, state organizations, universities, and private companies to build the ShakeAlert system, which you talked about, and the Earthquake Early Warning System for the west coast of the U.S. And the USGS has a goal of regionally limited public notifications by 2018, which is only a couple of years away. Doug also does seismic network coordination at the state and national level. He serves on multiple committees within the California Integrated Seismic Network and the Advanced National Seismic Network that work to integrate and coordinate earthquake monitoring nationally. So, Doug Given.
Well, thanks. So I want to give you an overview of earthquake early warning generally, and then our efforts to build an earthquake early warning system for the west coast of the United States. And I'll give some emphasis to what I think folks in the room are more interested in, which is the wireless communications telemetry components of the system and some of the challenges we have with those. Main purpose of this slide is to show that this is a very collaborative effort. You can see the lead organizations over there on the right. These organizations are not only involved in the earthquake early warning system, which we call ShakeAlert, but they've also, for a long time, been involved in earthquake monitoring in California and the Pacific Northwest more generally. We can skip that one. So I'm going to use a scenario example, and I don't know if I should apologize for using a Southern California example or if you guys will relish it being from the Bay and you just as soon Southern California get wiped out. So I'll use the magnitude 7.8 scenario earthquake that began in 2008 with the shakeout event. This is not a real earthquake. This is not a prediction. It's just something that could happen. And it's a good illustration of earthquake early warning because the earthquake begins quite a distance away from the main metropolitan areas of Southern California. So here we have about 180 miles of the southern San Andreas rupturing, but beginning at the southern end and breaking towards the northwest. So the little splat there is the epicenter. But one thing you must keep in mind is that large earthquakes don't happen at points, they happen along fault zones. So the initial rupture radiates those P and S waves that Steve talked about earlier. And if you were in Los Angeles, you would feel the P wave well in advance of the arrival of the S wave. And this concept is what most people think earthquake early warning is about, and it's not really, and I'll explain why. This would be one way to do earthquake early warning. Wait for the P wave to reach your location, and then you have what we call the S minus P time, the time delay between the arrival of the P and the S wave. But you can see that it took some time for that P wave to reach Los Angeles, and during that time you were wasting critical seconds when you could have alerted if you were able to detect that earthquake sooner, just as it began, by having sensors close to the epicenter. So that's our strategy. It's not to wait for the P wave to reach your location and then give you the S minus P time, but it's to blanket the seismogenic area with sensors so that we can detect it as rapidly as possible and send alerts with as much warning time as possible. So this is just to illustrate the important thing that Steve's already alluded to and that I've already alluded to, and that is the fact if you're in LA and this earthquake begins down near Salton Sea, 120 miles away or so, if that's all you know, you are going to underestimate how hard it's going to shake because the energy is radiated from the fault all the way along its length. And therefore, it's the section of the fault that's closest to you that is going to do the greatest damage where you are. So that must be taken into account as well. Getting tired of seeing this picture? So I want to walk through what might happen in this earthquake with an early warning system in place. So the earthquake begins. Notice the counter down on the lower right in the green numerals. This is about 5 seconds after the earthquake has begun. And that's the best metric for the performance of an early warning system. People often ask, how much warning will your system give? And that's a meaningless question because it depends on where you are. So if you're far away, you get more alert. If you're close, you get less. So the way we would prefer to measure it is elapsed time after the earthquake begins. So that's what that counter in the lower right is. So 5 seconds after the event begins, it hits enough sensors that the event can be characterized, recognized as a large earthquake in progress. And that's the real science in this system, is determining what's going on with very minimal data, very little of the ground shaking record. And in fact, the earthquake isn't even done yet. It hasn't even decided how big it's going to be. And so we estimate as rapidly as we can how big the earthquake is going to be, but the system must adapt over time as the earthquake evolves. So 5 seconds after the event, the system has detected the event and is ready to send out warnings to the surrounding population centers. But there's going to be a little spot in the center, right around the epicenter, which we call the blind zone, that will get no warning. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is our system is actually quite fast, and we have at least 2 example events in the Los Angeles basin where our station density is very tightly clustered, where we triggered at 3.8 seconds after origin time, and that was before the S wave even reached the surface. So there is no blind zone in that instance. At 10 seconds, the energy is radiating outward and propagating up the fault. Here we are at 25 seconds. Now Palm Springs is feeling the heavy shaking. So we triggered at 5 seconds. Palm Springs gets the energy at 25 seconds, so it's a challenge to you. How much warning did they get? Okay. Very good, about 20 seconds. I do this in some crowds, and it takes a while. I'm sure you guys. At 50 seconds, we've hit San Bernardino. So they got about 45 seconds or so. We're hitting Orange County about 1:10 afterwards, so they got over a minute's warning, and by the time the LA basin is fully involved, we're at about 1.5 seconds, or sorry, 1.5 minutes, or they got about 1 minute and 25 seconds. So a little about the history of our ShakeAlert system specifically. USGS began funding the research into this in 2006, and we've done this in 3-year phases. The first 3-year phase was research and development in a completely offline mode, but we anticipated that this was going to be important, and we began upgrading the seismic networks with the little bit of money that we did have. In the next phase, it was the operationalization phase, where we continued to upgrade the seismic networks for the sake of early warning. And at the end of that time period, we went live with a demonstration system in January of 2012. The demonstration system was sending live alerts to beta users. Beta users are those organizations and individuals who agreed to look at the data coming out of the system, but to take no actions because the system was not yet ready. It would produce false alarms, it would miss events, it would mess up the magnitude and therefore the estimate of ground shaking. So during the period of demo, it was good enough to expose to folks, get feedback about how they might use it, what we might tweak in order to make it more useful to the end users, but it was not ready for use yet. In February of this year, we transitioned from that demonstration system to what we call the production prototype. So that production prototype is much better engineered. We've removed as many single points of failure as we can. We now have 4 public-facing servers, 6 total processing machines. They are redundant, regionally distributed, and it's a much more robust system, to the point where we believe that we can start to court folks who have pilot projects. And so we're going to begin to allow some use of the system in very specific circumstances that are tolerant of mistakes in the system. Now, a footnote here, Bay Area Rapid Transit entered into an agreement with UC Berkeley, and they began using the system early, and they started slowing and stopping trains in August of 2012. The production prototype effort that we are in right now is only active in California, but we're planning to move it to the Pacific Northwest in the summer of this year. And as was stated earlier, it's the stated policy of the USGS to begin limited regional public alerts in 2018. The system has 5 major components. And you can see them here. And the ones that I guess the folks in this room might be most interested in are the arrows, because there are 2 telemetry problems in this system. Data basically flows from left to right, goes from the sensor networks out in the field. Then we have to get those data into the central processing systems with very low latency and very high reliability. The processing centers are both hardware and software, and a lot of science in that software. So I'll describe each of these components in a little more detail as we move on. But once you produce an alert, then you have to get that alert out with high reliability and very low latency to everybody. And that's the hard problem. How do you send alert to millions of people instantly? Most people think you can do that because they have a cell phone. You can't. And then finally, it doesn't do you much good to get the alert out to folks if they don't know what it is or what to do with it. And so there's a very significant public education component for the public alerting part. This is the planning map for the ShakeAlert seismic network in the 3 states of the West Coast. The colors, if you can make them out down in the lower right there, the blue ones are those that are currently online. There are about 650 of those. The green triangles are existing seismic stations that are simply too slow or of low quality that need to be upgraded in order to contribute to the system. And then the yellow dots are future stations to be installed. That's why they're in such regular order. Once you get out there and find out you're in the middle of a lake or in the territory of an angry landowner, or unfortunately in a state park or a wilderness area, you can't put the spots where you'd like them. And you can also see the diagram of what a station looks like. This station is both seismic and GPS in that diagram and in the photo. This is the current status once again. The red dots on the map on the right are the stations that are currently contributing. I didn't say it, but on the previous slide I said our goal is about 1,600. So we're about a third of the way there with the station build out. And we've concentrated our efforts in the metropolitan areas, which means that the Los Angeles metropolitan area going all the way down through the Coachella Valley is at target density, as is the Bay Area going down past San Jose. That's the good news. I took that slide out. The bad news is that there's still some latency issues, particularly in the Bay Area stations. In other words, the hardware still needs to be swapped out to some faster instrumentation that'll get the data to us quicker. And then we're also planning to include the geodetic networks. There is already a large array of high-rate, high-precision GPS stations along the West Coast. They're operated by a number of organizations. You can see them listed there: USGS, UNAVCO, University, or Central Washington University, Berkeley, and UC San Diego. And there was just a meeting yesterday of those players about how they could put all that data together, reduce the latencies in their systems, and feed data from all of these systems into the ShakeAlert system. The graph in the lower right-hand corner shows why the geodetic data is needed. It is the Tohoku event, and the red line shows what the JMA, the Japanese Meteorological Agency, estimated the magnitude to be over time. And you can see that it maxed out at about magnitude 8, and the event was a magnitude 9. So with seismic data alone, you miscalculate the size of the earthquakes. So the geodetic data is better at modeling that. There was a little mention earlier about the low-cost sensors. So here is the work that Ben Brooks and Sarah Minson are doing with low-cost sensors. It's basically a cell phone in a box along with an external high-precision GPS device, some backup power. These are, it gets around some of the problems of using cell phones. It uses a better quality sensor. It has AC power all the time, and it is stationary. It's not bouncing around in somebody's purse. And so this is being deployed in Chile as a proof of concept. You have to get the data back. So field telemetry, our strategy for getting the telemetry back into the central sites is to use everything available. The different networks have different mixes of telemetry, but telemetry diversity is the way to protect yourself. If Verizon goes down, you don't want to lose everything. So you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. This is the internals of the system. Way too much detail. You don't really need to worry about the details of this. This just shows that it's regionally distributed. We have servers in Pasadena, Menlo Park, Berkeley, and, as I said, in the summer in Seattle. And we actually had an example of a failure. We had a fire in the data center at Berkeley, took down the demo system and some of the redundant servers of the production prototype, but the system moved on without a hitch. So I've seen that we've got not too much time, so I'm going to jump forward to this. It's important that you understand that the earthquake evolves over time. A lot of the folks who think about the alerting problem think it's an on-off switch. You either alert or you don't. That's not how it works. You alert as quickly as you can, and then the earthquake keeps growing. The alert area grows over time. So this is 4 potential earthquakes with just a cartoon of how the alert area might grow over time. And therefore, the alert has more complexity than often people think about when they're thinking about how do you alert through cell phones or radio or television. Now, this is into territory you folks probably know more about than I do. Our strategy is to alert through all available means. Most people think cell phone. Well, text messaging to cell phones is not possible at the density and at the capacity that we need. You can't send 1 million text messages in a short amount of time. You would flood the carrier's capacity. It would take too long to pull it out and read it, and 10% of the adult population don't have smartphones. So it's not the panacea. A better approach than single messages, though, is oh, wait a second, let me talk about the smartphone apps. And push notifications, same problem. Text messages don't work. Push notifications to apps don't work for all the same reasons. But cell broadcast does have the potential to get the alert out to millions of people in a short period of time. You send the alert area to the telcos, they map their cell towers into it, and every one of those cell towers sends a broadcast alert, and anybody within range receives it. That's how the current IPAWS system and WCA system works. That's how you get AMBER alerts. So this is the IPAWS system, Integrated Public Alert and Warning. It is administered by FEMA, and the rules are set by the FCC. This is how alerts for tsunamis, for lost children, for severe weather go out to television, radio, NOAA weather radio, and cell phones. The problem with this is that it too is too slow. It was originally engineered for things like weather. And so it's too slow, it's voluntary. There's little business incentive for the telcos to continue to operate it. The message length is too short. And if you've all heard that annoying sound on your car radio during a test, that's mandated by law, and it's 8 seconds long. And so you've lost 8 seconds of your alert time if you wait for that to finish before you tell people, no, this isn't a tornado, it's an earthquake. The good news is there is some movement. The FCC rules are subject to change. There was just an announcement that closed for comment to change some of the problems in the IPAWS system with respect to early warning, to increase the message length, to improve geo-targeting. And there is an announcement open right now to reduce the latency. It is an attempt to reduce the latency in the WCA system to 3 seconds. And so if you want to comment on that, you can go to the FCC website and say why that's a good idea, and they ask some very specific questions about the impacts of trying to reduce those latencies down to 3 seconds. Meantime, the industry group ATIS, you guys are probably familiar with ATIS, the Alliance for Technology Innovation Solutions, I think it is, which is the cell carriers. They are independently working on 5G standards with very low latencies in order to send alerts for earthquake early warning. but those rules and equipment changes may take a long time, 5 to 7 years. We're working on some other mass notification technologies, including FM broadcast. And there are a number of sort of parallel and sometimes competing efforts in that space. There's the AWARN, which is looking to change the FM and television rules to include mass notification. We're working with a company in Florida called GNSS, Global Security Systems, that has an FM alert capability, uses radio digital system. And we've also talked to iHeartRadio, which owns lots of radio stations, about just interrupting with voice alert. That's what they were interested in doing. But even that has a 6-second latency. We're obviously interested in looking into satellite, but we don't have any partners there yet. We are looking at also IP, although the internet is not likely to fare well during heavy shaking, but if the early warning gets out before the shaking arrives, it could still be viable. We've talked to Google. They're interested in doing a test, pushing it out to their Nest home control devices. And of course, there's always things like sirens, set-top boxes, traffic signs, and so forth. We're going to do a lot of communication, education, and training. We're coordinating that with the state emergency management agencies. And in case you hadn't figured it out already, there are lots and lots of applications for this, but you should think of the applications as being in 2 primary categories: alerts to people and alerts to things. And we believe that the automatic controls will probably be the most effective in the long run, because they won't depend on human reactions, psychology, and extensive training. It doesn't matter if you know there's an early warning system if the elevator you're in stops at the next floor and opens the door, or if the train you're in slows down and stops. And so we think the automatic systems are going to be the least problematic when it comes to final end use. This is our list of beta users. Memorize it now. I'm going to flip the switch real quick. You won't be able to see it. So these are the organizations that are currently getting our signal, and they will probably be the ones who will be doing pilot projects here in the next year or so. I'm going to skip that as detail and end there.
So I'm glad to see that you're having some progress with the FM folks. By the way, I don't know if you folks are aware, but there's a petition going on right now. The Consumer Electronics Association is trying to convince the cell manufacturers to turn on the FM chips that are inside our phones. So apparently a lot of phones have, not apparently, they do, have FM chips, but they're not activated. And so one of the arguments that the CEA is making is that if the FM chips were activated, we could potentially use them for things like very low latency alerts. So I'd encourage you to look it up on Google, search for, I think it's like, I want my FM on my phone, or turn on my FM, or something like that. And so if you Google for this, I'll search for it, and then I'll talk about it during my next session.